feel like a singer now with this bright, like half shut down my throat. If you would, go ahead and grab a seat. There's seats up front here still. I'd like to keep a little space in the back for people that still are arriving. So I want to be respectful of people's time. We're going to go ahead and get rolling here. I'm sure a few people will still wander in. That's great. Thanks for showing up tonight. My name is Brad Webb. I'm not sure there's an official title, but kind of co-chair or one of the people involved with this group called Save Our Gallatin Front. That's not a nonprofit. It's simply whoever shows up that's trying to help work on this issue, that's what the group is. Over the past year, we've probably grown to a couple hundred people that are on an email list, weigh in, participate at different times. As this talks a little bit about who we are, I just want to say a little bit about the intent for tonight. Our intent for tonight is to give kind of a high-level overview of not what DNRC is proposing, because they don't have a formal proposal yet. They're in the process of doing some legwork, some groundwork to come up with their their EIS, and in that will be a few options to consider. The time to influence it is now. I'm not sure if there's anyone from DNRC here tonight or not. We did invite them. We've been working closely with them, trying to come up with some good alternatives. But tonight is to share some information about our group, share some ideas about how you might be involved if you so choose to be, how you can have some input. And probably the biggest thing tonight is to have Steve share the results of a wildlife study that he did in this area that is proposed for logging. A few things about the DNR's proposed project here. It is school trust land. This is different than national forests, state parks, national parks. It's land that is actually designated to earn some revenue for the state. And the state also there are some statutes that allow the state to do other things than just earn revenue with it. Right now, the beneficiaries for that are the school of mines and public buildings. It's not going to help Bozeman School, different area. They have not determined how much they're going to clear cut, but right now it's looking like it might be around 600 acres up there. It had been even higher at one point. As it's not a big trailed area, it's a little bit more difficult to get into. I'm not sure how many people have been back there, but it is one of the really, in my opinion, special areas south of town. One of the challenges and one of the concerns we have with wildlife is not just the timber harvest itself, but the impact of trying to put roads in there. Putting roads in it's pretty unstable terrain will be a challenge in and of itself, but the moment roads go in, you'll probably see a tenfold increase in the number of people there, which is really going to degrade the habitat. There has been talk, though it's not written in stone, that some of those roads would be left permanent and some would be removed. Hopefully we'll weigh in and shift that a little bit. So this is the current state of what is known as Limestone West. On the very, left-hand side would be Mount Ellis. Well, so much for that working. Mount Ellis up here moves down. It has the limestone drainage itself. Eagle Rock moves over. There's the three trees, triple tree drops down, and this is a really, to me and to many of us, a very special area. So this is the area that we're really looking at, that we're concerned about, we're working with tonight. A few years back, up on Mount Ellis, people probably saw some of the logging project up there. The limestone drainage that we're concerned about is even more valuable today because of the logging that went on Mount Ellis to the east, the Bear Canyon, High Use Canyon further to the east of Mount Ellis. And then if you go to the west, you have the Triple Tree Trail, but soon you rapidly get over into the Sourdough Trail, which is almost a highway, especially in the winter, but even with bikers in the summer. Then you move over and rapidly get into the highlight drainage with the road. This is the final remaining area south of Bozeman on what we call the Gallatin front that is not roaded, logged, or has a significant trail running up and down it. As such, we'll see a few maps here, as such it's a really important area for wildlife habitat. The lime green areas are the areas that are currently being considered as part of this timber harvest. Over here we have the Mount Ellis kind of fields where you park. They would drop a road in, cutting across, and then a series of different roads throughout the area to harvest. Again, not written in stone, but the lime green, the light green is what is being considered. The side here of Mount Ellis is too steep for harvest. They've decided some of this is too steep for harvest. Again, a mixture of Doug fir and lodgepole. Trying to give you a little bit better context, looking at it from just kind of a quick map here. One of the things is you can rapidly see the area limestone west, connects right to the National Forest, which is open, unroaded land running all the way down to Yellowstone Park. Almost everything else is heavily used or is cut by roads. Thought we had another slide there for that. So be it. With that, it's the next one. Let me just jump ahead, Steve, and we'll come back to you here. If you look at, actually I'll let Steve take it here because you're into your wildlife study with this one. So, friends of our Save Our Gallatin Front Group anteed up some money last year, just individual contributions. We hired Steve with Wild Things Unlimited to go in and do a wildlife study. Happened late last winter, early spring this year. He's got his report finished and is going to share the results of that with us. So Steve, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Brad. I'll just continue along the same line there that Brad was on with a little bit more in the way of orientation to the Gallatin face. So this is what we're referring to, this edge of the mountains where the mountains meet the grasslands here along the edge of the Gallatin Valley, going from I-90 and Trail Creek, Goose Creek. These heavy blue lines are public road access points, and there's 9 of those that I've indicated along the face here. So Trail Creek, Goose Creek, Bear Canyon, Mount Ellis, Triple Tree, let me get here, Bozeman Creek, Leverage, Highlight, South Cottonwood, and over here at the Big Bear, Little Bear. So those are all public road access, and all the magenta lines are trails that I took from the Gallatin County GIS online and put them on this map. The limestone area, again, is right in here, this roadless chunk right here. Let's see here. For wildlife, everything begins with habitat. So I'm just going to briefly talk about that. Brad mentioned Douglas fir and lodgepole pine. There's forests here, which include mid-age to old age Douglas fir, mid-age to old age lodgepole pine. There's some really nice spruce and fir in the wetter areas on the north-facing slopes and in some of the bottomlands. As far as coniferous trees, there's a pretty good aspen component, small to large patches of of aspen and associated shrublands with things like willow, dogwood, hawthorn, serviceberry, and then a whole lot of nine bark in the Douglas fir forest as well. And then amongst that are grasslands, some medium to large grasslands as well. This is just another habitat shot looking back out towards the Gallatin Valley with mature forest there, and again, shrublands and grasslands. This was an early map of the proposed timber harvest area. Just to reiterate that part of it, the colored patches here are all proposed cutting units. All the dashed lines are proposed roads. So it's in parts of four sections here. This is the Mount Ellis access, and these roads represent the areas that have already been logged on the north side of the area here. So I designed and implemented a very simple, very basic project to document what was happening in this area over the course of 4 months this past winter, from December through March. And that consisted of just getting out on the ground and seeing what was there. So I did snow tracking surveys. I did 22 surveys during 14 days. I tried to pick days which were good to excellent conditions for tracking. So that means basically no snow and no big wind events for at least 2 nights. So the animals have a chance to move around, leave their tracks, and leave them undisturbed for at least a couple nights. Those 22 transects covered about 62 kilometers total. And those are indicated here with these red lines. Mixed in here, these boxes and accompanying circles represent camera stations. I also had 6 remotely triggered cameras that I placed out there. The objective was to try and get photos of animals that were simply using the area as part of their everyday lives. And I specifically did not want to draw animals in from great distances to alter or skew the results. So I only used very small amounts of scent lures rather than large, really smelly baits. So that really influenced the results kind of in a negative way as well, because I didn't get nearly as many photos as I could have if I used something much smelly. But I'll talk about that a little bit more. When I placed all my observations on one map, it looked like this. This is a little bit messy and complicated, so I'm going to break the results down into more manageable pieces as I talk about some of the findings. As I walked those transects, either just hiked or snowshoed, I recorded tracks of significant animals, mostly carnivores, excluding the very, very common ones like coyotes and skunks and weasels, which there were a lot of. And then just general observations for other things like ungulates and small herbivores. So beginning with ungulates, there are quite a few in the area, especially deer, high numbers of whitetail and mule deer, some elk, and some moose. I'll go into more detail, especially related to moose and elk. Fair amount of good moose habitat here with these patches of aspen and willow, which are really ice cream plants for moose, very nutritious, highly favored plants for moose. I recorded only a couple actual observations of moose. One here and one over here. All the other symbols represent observations of moose tracks and pellet groups. I always made sure I was actually looking at moose tracks by finding associated moose pellets before I marked them down. There are 35 of those symbols on here. I saw a moose sign during 12 out of the 22 surveys, and certainly did not record all of it because sometimes it was just too much going on in some places, or I didn't have time to record it all. But these symbols represent a pretty good idea of where moose were during those 4 months. I was especially interested to see the level of moose sign along this dividing ridge between Limestone and the Bozeman Creek drainage here, up around the 7,000 to 7,500 foot level throughout the course of the winter. And I believe that's possible because this is mostly north facing, it stays cool. The snow is fairly deep, but it's also light enough that these long-legged moose can maneuver and still use that really nice habitat in the upper reaches of these drainages. Moose presence here, I believe, is significant because moose are suffering in many areas. The populations have been declining in much of the Rocky Mountain region, and particularly here in southwestern Montana. So to me, any place that we have good, healthy numbers of moose and good habitat, they're very important to the overall long-term survival of this species in the region. Elk were present here in the winter as well. These elk would be part of what's known as the Gallatin face subpopulation. The population objective for this population is about 400 to 600 animals. I'm not sure what the actual estimate is right now, but it's kind of been ranging in that area. And these are the elk that wander out into the grasslands around the southern edge of Bozeman throughout the course of the winter. A number of them come up into the mountains here to spend the winter, and other times of year. I noticed a lot, I don't know how clear this is for you, but these are rub trees. Trees that are rubbed during the rut when the elk are rubbing the velvet off their antlers. And I saw hundreds and hundreds of these, primarily in the middle-aged lodgepole pine forests. So very important during the rutting season, and that's happening up here in the mid to upper levels of these north-facing slopes. Also reportedly, I wasn't there in the spring, but other users indicate that there are also very important pockets of elk calving habitat up here as well. All of these ungulates, in addition to healthy populations of smaller herbivores like squirrels and hares, that all leads to a very healthy and diverse population of carnivores. The 10 species shown here is actually 11 known because this guy represents 2 weasel species, both long-tailed and short-tailed. So we have 5 weasel species, 3 dog species, a couple cats, and bears. I did not document bears because I was there in the winter when they were denning, and I did not document wolf presence or activity, but again, other users have indicated wolf activity periodically in the region. So we have marten, American marten, long and short-tailed weasel, skunk and wolverine, coyote, fox, red fox and wolf, mountain lion, bobcat, and black bear as our 11 carnivore species. Now I'm going to break this, as I said, break the results down here. In particular, the cats on this map. These green circles represent 23 observations of mountain lion tracks during 9 of the 22 surveys. I don't know if you can make this out. Maybe we can dim the lights a little bit more. These are fairly clear, but this is a kind of a ghost lion that was captured on one of the cameras as it just moved through the field of view. I had a couple other shots very similar to this. As far as I could tell, those 23 track observations represented a minimum of 3 mountain lions, one obviously large adult male, a smaller adult, probably a female, and then an even smaller set of tracks representing a subadult. So pretty consistent mountain lion use, and the numbers of deer in there certainly provide an adequate, very adequate prey base. There are just, I don't know how many deer, but I saw thousands and thousands of their tracks. Bobcats were not nearly as commonly observed. I only saw their tracks 7 times during 4 of the surveys, and those are indicated here in orange, so kind of spread out randomly over the area. One of the things probably that surprised me the most was the level of marten use. The American marten, or pine marten, is a medium-sized weasel, 3 to 5 pounds, kind of a generalist carnivore that eats mice and voles and squirrels, hares, and probably even some slow-moving birds like grouse. So this photo is actually from one of the camera stations in Limestone Creek. Their tracks are very obvious, this offset two-print pattern. The Forest Service and the Gallatin Forest, in particular, in this case, has used the marten as an indicator species to indicate the presence of healthy forests, basically cool, moist, late successional forest, or what I would call old growth, which there's a lot of across the slopes here in the limestone region. The purple circles here represent 103 observations of marten tracks during 16 of the 22 surveys. And you can see they are well distributed across my survey routes. Now, my wife and I have done surveys all over the Gallatin Range and many of the ranges to the north over the last 25 winters, and the Gallatin Range really holds some of the highest densities of martens in our region. It tapers off very quickly when you go northward into the Bangtails, Bridgers, Big Belts, and all the way up to Helena, the Continental Divide areas. Those areas have very few martens. So we have a good population here, and the fact that this area represents kind of the northernmost extension of that Gallatin Range marten population, I think makes it even more significant, because that could be a jumping off point for martens to go northward and reoccupy some habitat in some of those other areas where they haven't been for a while. I think the habitat is still there in other areas, but I believe martens were trapped out of a lot of those areas and could well come back given the chance. Our other major weasel here, the wolverine. I saw wolverine tracks during one day of the winter. 3 sets of tracks here on the north ridge of Mount Ellis in March. Again, we've done surveys all around the region, and the Gallatin Range is a stronghold for wolverines, we know that, along with the Madison Range. Those are 2 very important ranges for wolverines in this part of Montana. So I backed out here a little bit with the map to show you a couple other points. This one and this one were wolverine tracks also observed this winter by a couple of colleagues of mine. That's up at the head of Lick Creek, the Highlight, Bozeman Creek Divide, and then up the East Fork of Highlight here. And you can see how those all fit kind of a nice line here, again representing the northern extension of this nice wildland that we have here in the form of the Gallatin Range and its remaining wilderness. Birds were not a part of my study, but I did have access to some bird information, so I included it in my report. And this information was compiled by John Parker of Bozeman. And his list indicated 130 bird species that have been observed in the limestone west area. 72 of those are breeders or potential breeders, and 10 are species of concern. This is a Montana designation, meaning population has been declining and is in potential trouble. So that's available if anybody wants to take a closer look at that.
Those are the ones in bold font.
Pardon me?
Are the species of concern the ones in bold?
They're the underlined ones. Yeah, the underline here. And the bold is breeding, potentially breeding. And then my final slide here, I'm coming back to this slide of roads and trails to talk a little bit about the corridor, wildlife corridor concept. Again, limestone, west area here, Bear Canyon road here. This Bear Canyon area, between the mouth of Bear Canyon and Trail Creek over here, has been identified as a linkage, part of a linkage area connecting the Gallatin with the Bridgers and Bangtails as part of what's known as the Gallatin Bridger Big Belt Wildlife Corridor, one of two potential corridors that could link the greater Yellowstone ecosystem to the northern continental divide ecosystem. It all passes right through a bottleneck right here. And you can see the limestone area is right in line with that bottleneck. So animals, I tried to represent 6 major wide-ranging animals here: mountain lion, elk, wolf, lynx, wolverine, and grizzly bears, potential animals that would like to make long-range movements and might desire to go back and forth between these ranges along this corridor. Forest Service has identified this as a potential linkage area. Other people, the Craigheads, have looked at this as a wildlife connection, documenting roadkill and really proving that animals are trying to get across here. Some are making it and some are not, but a very important area and kind of a funnel. If you look at the roads and trails here, we all know what the highlight road and trail system is like. So from Bozeman Creek, Highlight, going westward, it's a mass of access and human activity, and less so over here. So animals that are trying to use that corridor would come out of the Gallatin Range and have to swing eastward here and then make their way. There's a nice riparian area that actually comes right out of here and links up with Bear Creek down in here. A little bit open, but quite a bit of cover that an animal could certainly use that as another possible crossing in this narrow constriction here. So a very important piece of the puzzle in terms of the bigger picture of wildlands and wildlife corridors. So that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Thanks, Steve. We've got a few more slides that we're going to go through, and then we'll open it up for questions. And certainly if you have wildlife questions, Steve will stay here and he'll answer any of those type of questions, as well as any other questions that people in the group might have. I'd like to, before I move on to the last few slides, I'd like to just point out a couple of other things. While there are many people in this room, what you may not know is, and I'll send a greeting out to the room across the hall, we set up as an overflow room. And there are a number of folks over there that are watching this presentation. So welcome to all of those folks that are in the overflow room, as well as we're live streaming this on YouTube. So we may have some people that are watching us from other locations, and again, want to say welcome. So to kind of bring things to a closure here, a lot of what Steve found in his study is information that the DNRC actually put together in a study that they conducted in 1980. And I'm not going to go through all of the details about it, But fundamentally, they found limestone west to be a very unique wildlife habitat. They were concerned about the geologic structure and the ability to put roads into that area. And their recommendation at that time was not to pursue logging into the limestone west area. Now, subsequent to that, they never fully adopted that EIS, but it is there, and many of the findings that they determined in 1980 haven't really changed today. The geologic structure hasn't changed, the wildlife habitat hasn't changed. So, you know, a lot of what Steve found in his research just sort of re-emphasizes the information that the DNRC found in the 1980s. So where are we in our project? Well, we're working together with the DNRC. I think Brad asked if anyone of DNRC is here this evening. They have their hands full this time of year with fire management. Many of the local DNRC people that are working on this project are engaged in the firefighting activities. So it's not surprising that they're not here. They have important other matters to take on. But we continue to have good dialogue with them. We've been meeting with them for over a year with the sole purpose of trying to find an alternative approach to their logging project. And we'll continue to engage and meet with them as we go forward. Where they are in their process right now is they are completing an EIS assessment of the area. The timetable for that continues to kind of shift backwards as they have limited resources to work through things. The most recent date that they've told us right now is that they would have the EIS completed by next spring. But that's all subject to change depending on how they feel they've pulled together their information for that EIS. So one of the things that we're going to want to at least throw out tonight is that we need more help. There's a number of us that have been working on this for almost 18 months now. And we continue to push on many fronts to help see if we can find the right outcome or a better outcome for the community. So we'd ask all of you to get involved. We pushed around an email sheet sign up. If you haven't gotten that yet, please find it before you leave tonight. If you're interested, give us your name and your email address. We will email people with an update on things as they proceed as we go forward. If you want to become more active in the group, please reach out to us as well. We can use more people, more hands. In particular, we're looking to spend more time reaching out to the business community in the Gallatin Valley area here. So if you're a business owner or a business representative and want to be involved in that, we'd love to have you. We'd encourage you to express concerns to your local and state elected officials, and that's everything to members of the Land Board, which is basically made up of the governor, the Secretary of State, the Commissioner of Insurance and Securities, the Superintendent of Public Schools, and the Attorney General. So the top 5 elected officials, they are the members of the Land Board, and it'll ultimately be the Land Board's decision on what happens here with the Limestone West logging project. We'd also advocate that you reach out to county commissioners if you have relationships with them and share your thoughts relative to the project with them, as well as any city commissioners, again, that you may know. If we're going to change the outcome of this event, it's going to need to be a broader community effort, not just individuals that are trying to move this along. So again, we're looking to broaden our reach, and if any of you are able or interested in doing that, we would welcome your participation. In the spring, when the EIS comes out, we'll want to make sure that we have a good public response to that EIS. So if any of you are inclined, we will again continue to update you by email, but the more public comments that we can put in on the project, the better. And we're just basically looking to advocate for an alternative outcome to this logging project. If you are an expert in some of these areas, we would also value your time and energy and efforts if you're so inclined. Anyone with geology and soil experience, hydrology, forestry. At some point, we might need to get into fundraising, but that's down the road if that happens. So again, if you have expertise in those areas and you're inclined to engage with our group, we would welcome that. So what's next? Well, on the long-term horizon, the big next is really when the state completes the EIS. Until that document is completed, it's hard for us to, know exactly what their plans are. In the interim, we will continue to dialogue with them on a number of fronts, and again, with the idea of trying to influence the outcome of this event. We are hosting a series of hikes in the month of September. We have 3 different dates, the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd. And we're welcoming community members to join us, where we will be starting out at the trailhead at the end of Mount Ellis Lane, and we will hike up into the Limestone Creek area. And we've got members of our group that are experienced in being in that area. And if any of you are interested and have not hiked in that area, I would encourage you to participate in one of these hikes. It's really a very sort of pristine wildlife area that hasn't had a lot of traffic or human intervention into the area. So we'll meet at the trailhead. I think we have sign-up sheets here, is that right?
Yeah, outside the door.
Okay, so on the outside the door, if you're interested, please sign up tonight on one of the sign-up sheets. You can also go to our website, which is saveourgallatinfront.org, and you can sign up on the website to participate in one of those hikes. And for those of you that are dog owners, you'll notice that on the 16th, we're making it a dog-friendly event. Make sure that you bring your own food and water. The hike will last anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. We may, determine the length of the hike based on the interest of the people that are there on that given day. And we may actually set up 2 different groups, one with a little shorter route, one with a little longer route. So again, if you're not a real hardcore hiker and want to just do a shorter section, we'll probably have that as an option. And then if you're interested in a more further exploration of the area, we will be doing that as well. So with that said, are there any other detailed things that I need to do, Jeff?
Well, who has the clipboard? The sign-up sheet clipboard?
So I guess at this point, we will open the room up for questions, comments, thoughts.
Jim, first off, you and your staff have done a simply superb job. What we understand here is that DNRC is proposing a one-time revenue project in exchange for a consequence of 50 to 100 years consequence to our forests. Now, you've successfully reduced the gross amount of acreage that's been contemplated from a year and a half ago. Can you update us in terms of the net revenue that DNRC would benefit from in the one-time shot to clear cut and do all this stuff? And then secondly, are they responsive? Because we may be talking $200,000 to $500,000. Are they responsive to a 50 or 100-year easement if in fact we could raise that amount of money?
Yeah, all good questions. The answer is not 100% sure. The only sort of facts I can sort of reference is the Bear Canyon project on the east side of Mount Ellis went to bid at $750,000 ballpark. Acreage-wise, sort of in the same range, but I can't tell you that this would go for the same dollar amount or not, because that was 3 years ago. Timber prices, I think, are up a bit since then, so it's a little hard to say exactly where the dollar amounts would be. When we start looking at easements or those type of ideas, it gets complicated. We are having discussions with the DNRC on it, but I'm not sure that either they or us have enough facts in place today that I can tell you that we would get 100 years on an easement. I think those are all things that are still question marks, but our group is and will continue to engage with the DNRC on those topics.
2 things. First of all, I don't live in that area. I live in the Bridger Bridger Canyon area. I'm here because I'm really impressed with how organized you've been and all that you've done. I wish Bridger Canyon, in spite of its zoning district, had done something as effective and specific to the wildlife. I'm very worried about this linkage because Bridger Canyon and Bozeman Pass are the recipient areas of the wildlife that move, and things that are done in those areas as well as in this area are the bottlenecks. So this is really huge. A couple of things. Even though I'm out of area, I would be happy to contribute to any fund if this gentleman's idea were a possibility, trade out all of us giving money to stopping the logging. Secondly, I would suggest you contact the Bridger Canyon zoning district and the Bozeman Pass zoning district, because if this happens, all the animals that are supposed to be coming into those districts aren't necessarily going to be happening anymore. And people care in those areas. Also, in Bozeman Pass, in their zoning documents, it does specify that it is a wildlife corridor. And that may add, if you aren't aware of that already, that it's in writing, that may add some strength to your argument about your wildlife corridor. We've been trying to get it into the Bridger Canyon zoning. That's been strongly resisted, unfortunately. But nonetheless, there are a lot of people in both those areas that would be willing probably to contribute money and effort into this as well. So if there's some way the Bridger Canyon Fire District building, you could do a presentation like this to Bridger Canyon, Bozeman Pass people to educate people on this sort of thing, I think you would get increased support.
Okay. Thank you very much for your thoughts. And I'm going to ask Jeff Yates or someone from our group, Viviana, would you capture an email address and a contact so that we can circle back on this and not lose track of it? Any other hands?
Did anybody contact the NRC to come to this? Sorry about that. Did anybody contact the NRC to come to this meeting so that they can get the information?
And here, everyone's people have it.
Yeah, okay, so the question was, did we contact the DNRC about this meeting and see if they wanted to be here? The answer to that question is yes. Again, I want to represent that we have a very good dialogue with the DNRC. We are not in a contentious relationship with them. We are really trying to seek and understand one another and see if we can find an alternative that works for both perspectives or point of view on this. So they were invited, but again, as I said earlier, this is a very heavy fire season, and I'm almost certain that the local guys, Craig Campbell and Chuck Barone, are probably pulled into some aspect of the fire management activity that the DNRC is facing now. And I know the other people that we've dialogued with are based in Helena and Missoula, and maybe not have been easy for them to get down here for the day. So the answer to your question is, we are communicating with the DNRC, and we would have welcomed them to be here this evening.
Hi, I'm Anna, and I just want to say that I'm very proud of Montana for having such a small population and such a strong university system. And I do think the University of Montana School of Mines and Technology is incredibly important to that system. And I just want to say how much I appreciate this group's emphasis on alternatives so that we can maybe find an alternative and still support our incredibly impressive university system. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that I appreciate you doing that a lot. Thanks.
All right.
Hi, my name is Lori, and I wondered if you could comment on the interests of various parties in this discussion. For example, the wildlife themselves can't vote, but the neighbors who live near the wildlife, how that could be accused of a NIMBY mentality. And my specific question is there a particular need for this wood that would be harvested, or is it simply a means to raise money? So is there a pressure to actually get this wood, and are there jobs associated with that?
That's a great question. I'll answer the second part first. Yeah, sawmills need wood. I live in a stick house. We're not opposed to logging. There's lots of other areas that can be logged, including school trust land. So, you know, while we're trying to preserve this, we're not trying to shut down logging all over. You know, we didn't stand in any opposition or concern with the Mount Ellis recent logging, the Bear Canyon. You know, if we're gonna live in stick houses, we need that timber. The quality of most of that timber up there, the lodgepole, is not going to produce a lot of timber. The timber mills that this would probably go to, the sawmills, are not in Gallatin County. They'd either be probably up in Townsend or over in Livingston, most likely. It's hard to say who bids on anything. There's a number of people who've raised concerns of, is this a NIMBY, not in my backyard effort? I put a lot of time into this. I live at the base of the Bridgers up Sites Canyon. There are people, you know, I look around here who've been really involved in this, who live, you know, much further east, over towards 19th, up by I-90. Well, I see a few people, and I don't even know where you live. But showing up and pitching in, so I really appreciate the broad-based, you know, contribution that people had on this. There are other interests. You know, there are people who would love to be able to hike easier in there. There are people who've come to me and said, Brad, there's no access. There's actually quite a bit of access, but there's not major trails like a lot of people are used to. You know, it is a stout walk to go from the sourdough drainage back into the limestone drainage, and it's incredible. It's amazing. But you gotta be a workout to do it. You can also go in Mount Ellis. There's a variety of access points. That is another interest group on this.
Yeah, and let me just follow up one more thing on the economic question, right? So 3 members of our group, we went up to Townsend and we met with Ed Regan with RY Timber. We are so committed to trying to find another path forward that we're even talking to the lumber guys. So we're not, you know, like Brad was saying, we're not a hardcore anti-lumber group. We realize there are people, a lot of people make a living from the lumber industry, not just the direct jobs with that, but the indirect jobs and building houses and, you know, all the things that go along with that. And those are things that we're not taking on, but we are trying to find another path forward. So we are looking under every rock and willing to talk to any constituency to see if we can find something that makes, you know, a path forward that everyone can live with.
Hi, my name's Ron. I'm a part-time member of the committee. One of our meetings, it was very interesting, the meeting elucidated this concept of when it's all said and done, the logging is done, how much profit actually is gained from that logging process. There was a talk of 175 and 200,000, somewhere along that would be donated to school. We brought up at that time, why not raise funds to donate to school as a private entity to offset the logging, and they can go somewhere else on their trust land, and we could pay the school directly as a group.
It's an idea and a concept. We have to talk again with all the state constituencies, government constituencies that are, you know, players in all this. But we are open to any and all ideas. And if other people have ideas that we haven't thought of, we'd certainly entertain those thoughts.
I mean, realizing it's old sand and something has to be done to keep some of that stuff from being massive fire dangers like we're having right now. But what are the other alternatives you guys are talking about? You say we're discussing all these, you talked about the easement. Do you have a list of other ones you've discussed with them so far?
Yeah, there's 2 primary vehicles, and I don't want to go into all the details with it because I can bore you to tears for hours on it, but there's basically an opportunity to do a conservation license in lieu of a timber logging project, and then there's also a concept of a public easement. Both of them have a lot of moving tentacles, a lot of moving parts that would require, you know, a fair amount of effort to put them in place. We have all of that in the works, but like I said, if you wanted more details on it, I'd be happy to talk to you in private about it, but I could spend quite a bit of time on them because each of them has their own nuances and each of them has their own challenges in terms of finding the implementation path.
Okay, go ahead, Mike. I want to make sure we get Mike Phillips.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Mike Phillips, and I've had the tremendous privilege to represent this area in the legislature for the last many years and currently sit in the Montana Senate. So this is of great interest to me, and what this group has done is impressive. That you came out tonight is impressive. It will matter. Good governance is a contact sport, and you guys are apparently willing to engage. That's a good thing. The second slide that Brad showed spoke to alternatives for our community. From a DNRC perspective or the State Land Board, that's not nearly good enough. And if you want to continue to drive Bozeman into an odd direction as far as the state leaders are concerned, embrace a need for our community. We've got to come up with a solution that addresses the needs of the state of Montana. That will resonate with DNRC. That will resonate with the Land Board. This idea of providing the financial benefits that would come from cutting the trees is a beautiful idea. If new legislation is needed, we can certainly move that forward. Introducing bills is not a difficult thing to do, and I'm smart enough to realize that while I'm very good at introducing bills that die in committee, I'm good at that. And I got that figured out. I've got a lot of friends that are very good at passing bills on the other side of the aisle, and they will be intrigued by this notion of finding yet another way to skin this cat. I want to emphasize that you have about 2 years to set this issue aside. Now, when you read the tea leaves going forward in 2020, that campaign, it's highly likely that the Democrats will lose the governor's office in 2020. And you look at me and say, why is that the case? In part, our bench is a bit thin these days. Nearly all of our statewide elected officials in the last statewide election got beat, except in Governor Bullock. Moreover, we've had 16 years of Democratic leadership on the second floor of the Capitol building. All good things come to an end at some point. It's also likely that the Republicans will continue to control the majority in both chambers. Consequently, we probably won't have any more residents in 2021 than we have right now. We have to figure out some way to move this issue forward and set it aside for a long period of time in the next 2 years. And the solution cannot be Bozeman-centric. It has to address the needs of the state. Otherwise, whatever we propose will fall on deaf ears with the State Land Board. So thank you for coming out. These are great ideas. I stand ready to help as I can. I am personally intrigued by this idea of finding enough fiscal capacity to provide all the benefits without cutting many trees.
I'm Helen. When we were talking about this earlier, last spring, there was a lot of conversation about the fact that this was somewhat time limited. That is, the value of the timber is going down because a lot of that lodgepole pine is beetle killed. Can you illuminate a little bit more what the time frame actually is, and when are they proposing to do this logging, and is it still viable if it gets dragged out a little longer?
That's a good question. Originally, DNRC expected to have a study done and actually maybe even move something forward with the land board about a year ago. They pushed it back because of the need to do further research on this and some of the challenges, I think, tied to getting a road in there. That said, based upon the timeline that they most recently shared with us, we'll probably have an EIS done next spring. Had been late this fall, but next spring. There'll be a public comment period. Usually in what they put forth are a couple different options. They would then choose after the comment period, unless there's any roadblocks, taking a recommendation to the land board, and once that's approved, it would go to bid. In all likelihood, just based on my limited experience logging and working in the woods and watching Mount Ellis, they'd probably be looking at logging in the winter. I do think there's a lifespan on the usability of some of the timber in there. Some of it's still really quite good timber. It's not all, beetle kill when you go through there, though there is some beetle kill. Other questions? So, why don't you go back to Joe there, who's been patient.
Joe Gutkowski, I'm a landscape architect. And the Gallup Valley front from Carter's Bridge, which would be on the west end of this total slope.
Joey, the mic. Put the mic closer to Joe.
Go east from Carter's Bridge all along, and there's only about 1/5 of that whole total slope that is left for wildlife and for wildlife corridors. And so it's worth saving. Look at the logging that DNRC has done over in Richards Gulch, over out of Bear Canyon. And they've literally dried up this beautiful moose habitat, the north slope, clear cutted it, leave trees went down the first winter, and we have nothing. The moose just had to leave, and we won't have moose habitat there for 60 years. So this 1/5 of the total slope, which is so important for calving, for winter holding over, and it is just that.
Good, thanks, Joe. We're going to move on to other questions, but I think, Joe, you got a real important point, and I appreciate you making that.
My name is Jennifer. Could you please discuss how the old growth characteristics of this area fit into DNRC's requirement to maintain a certain percentage of old growth?
According to DNRC, and I'm not an expert on this, but in one of the earlier meetings with DNRC, their stance was, while there's old trees up there, it's not technically considered old growth. Now granted, if you cut them down before they get to old growth, then I guess we never get old growth. You have two types of trees up there, and others can speak to this probably far better than I. It goes back a couple years, a couple decades from some of my ecology classes. But you have the lodgepole pine, which pretty much grows and then dies, usually from fire, regrows again, almost as one living organism. Then we have some Doug fir up there, which does tend to grow more to an old growth. Historically, fire had cleaned out some of the understory there to allow the larger trees to even be more robust and grow. I think what DNRC wants to do is, at least with the Doug fir, is not go in and clear cut that, though they would clear cut the majority of the area with the lodgepole, but actually do some more limited harvest with the Doug fir. Limited harvest with the lodgepole, according to DNRC, Joe just spoke about it, to leave a few trees stand here and there, they just get blown over. They're kind of like one entity that it's all or nothing. And we saw that in Yellowstone in '88. If you go down in Yellowstone, it's all or nothing with lodgepole. Other types of trees a little bit different.
I would just like to point out that one of the DNRC employees, one of the DNRC employees, I believe he was a silviculturist, said they had gone in and done some core sampling, and that there were trees, Doug fir, that were 275 years old, tucked back in there. And he indicated that that's what what RY is really after.
Well, I can imagine RY would be after those trees because it has significant value. And when we meet with DNRC, and I'm going to check that out, because what I had understood from what they said, which might be different than what they said, is there actually was no old growth up there. And I do believe DNRC does have some language and some standards to try to protect old growth forests because there's so little of it left in the state. Let's catch some other questions. We're coming up on an hour. While we run another 5 minutes, then you're more than welcome to corner us as we go along.
Hi, my name is Glenn, and as most of us probably know, when logging is about to occur in the national forests, they have to do either an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement, and they are required to, again, this is on the national forest level, they are required to consider all of the multiple uses, including wildlife. Can you enlighten us on the standards by which our state DNRC operates, as to whether they're subject to even stricter environmental requirements than on national forest, or is the bar much lower?
That's a good question. My understanding, looking at this, is school trust land, which is different than just all state land, but school trust land is set aside, and was set aside when Montana got statehood, to generate revenue for schools. And as such, they're not required to the degree that, say, national forest is, or federal lands, to consider everything in such a detail. They really want revenue, because that's what they're mandated with. They can and are obligated to take into account other considerations, but the overarching piece is still revenue. School trust lands are more than forest lands. There's grazing land, there's agriculture land. Some of the former agriculture land is now commercial land that is leased. So there's a variety of school trust lands that are used. Other questions? Let's go into it one after. Go ahead.
I have a question for Steve. Is there a way to quantify the effect of the logging on the wildlife, especially the indicator species? In other words, what if we contracted you to do a survey of the Mount Ellis forested area this coming winter, because we do have one more winter? Would that be of any benefit to show and contrast the amount of tracks on indicator species of the previously or recently harvested area compared to what you did this previous winter?
Yes, I think that would be worthwhile for comparative purposes to compare timber harvest area to this more pristine area. There's a lot of information in the literature about the impacts of logging and roads on wildlife, so I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who are working on it from that angle. But it never hurts to have site-specific information to go along with studies that have been done elsewhere. So yes, I think that would be valuable.
Thanks for letting me speak.
Just as a follow-up to that, we actually had a conversation with Steve on that very topic that you just raised, about doing some studies in adjacent areas to Limestone West, if we have that luxury this winter to provide comparative data. So, good thought.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Smiley. I didn't introduce myself earlier. I go by Smiley. And I thank you all for being here and making this great presentation. As you can tell, I'm not a native of Montana. I moved here because I just love Montana. And I'm sure that most of you here move here or are born here for the same reason. I'd like to know how many of you have moved here because Montana is so beautiful. Wow. How many of you were born here? I feel sorry for you. In fact, I'm very jealous of you. But isn't it odd that about 90% of us that move here are trying to tell you what you can do with your state? Don't forget that. If you didn't, I would like to have this for about 3 minutes if I can.
You can ask a question. Ask a question.
Sorry, locals.
My name is Tim Presso. I'm an attorney with a group called Earth Justice. I wanted to. Okay, sorry. Yeah, my name is Tim Presso. I'm an attorney with a group called Earth Justice, and we're lawyers who sue people to protect the environment. I just had a friendly amendment to Brad's answer about the DNRC's legal obligation and what they have to consider. Their culture is to generate money. Their legal mandate is to manage these lands in the long-term interest of the people of the state of Montana. What is in the long-term interest of the people of the state of Montana? That's what you need to tell me. These issues are ultimately political, and we live, fortunately, still in a democracy. They need to hear from you. If you care about this place, if you want to see it kept the way it is, if you don't want to see the same kind of scars that exist on other places around the edge of the valley and this drainage as well, they need to hear from Bozeman, and they need to have voices raised up to defend this place. We need to pursue creative solutions. We need to pursue creative solutions, but all those creative solutions get a lot more likely to be accepted by DNRC if they know they have stirred up the hornet's nest. And that's what needs to happen in this community. So I wanted to offer that.
So we'd just like to publicly thank Tim and Earth Justice. They have been a great counsel to our group over the last number of months. Most of us that are involved with this group, quite honestly, are lay people. We all have jobs, day jobs, and this is like our second job. So being able to have someone like Tim from time to time give us guidance and advice has been very valuable. Again, we seek that support from others in this community if you're so inclined. At this point, we're going to kind of bring this to a closure because it's a little after 8 o'clock. If any of you have anything that you would like specific questions on, we'd be happy to answer those individually after we break up here. And if you haven't signed up already on one of the clipboards and you want to be on our mailing list or you want to be on our communications list, please do that before you leave. And with that, I think we'll say thank you all for coming out tonight and taking